Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Welcome to art for this week. This is going to be our next lesson. We're going to kind of keep learning about that same list of really important ingredients for our artwork. The list we said was called the elements of art. Last time we learned about lines, and this week we're going to keep going down that list, and the next most important thing on that list of those different elements is shapes. Now, shapes are used for all kinds of things in art. Sometimes artwork is just about the shape. If I'm drawing a square, maybe that's all I want my picture to be. But when you think about all the other things that we could draw, you use shapes, you combine small, simple shapes to make something bigger and better. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to practice with some basic shapes, and then we're going to look at maybe combining them. If you think about the story that we read earlier with the children going through that big box of shapes, that's all they were doing. They were taking normal, simple, easy shapes and combining them together to make something else. So that's kind of what today is going to be like for us. Before we get started, I wanted to talk about there are two different kinds of shapes. Not all shapes are the same. Now we know not all shapes look the same, but there's actually some different categories of shapes. So the word categories, if you don't know, it's just kind of like groups. So we might have a bunch of kids in school. They're all kids, but there's two categories. There's boys and there's girls. So categories are kind of like a group of their own thing, even though they might all be the same thing. So when we talk about shapes, the two main categories that we have are organic shapes. Organic shapes are things from nature. These are things that don't really have a name. We don't look at it and say, oh, I know exactly what that one's called. These might be the shapes of leaves or lakes or ponds or puddles. Just things that show up in nature. They don't have a lot of like straight lines. They don't have a lot of angles. The other one, the one that we all kind of know about, the one that we know the names to, those are called geometric shapes. Geometric shapes are the ones that we think about. They are the ones, squares and triangles and circles, that have names, that it's always going to be the same shape. Doesn't matter if it's a big giant square or a little teeny tiny square, it's still a square. So those are kind of some of the main differences between the two different categories of shapes. One we create, one nature creates. That's kind of the biggest difference between those two. Today we're going to focus about the geometric shapes a lot more than that other kind, the organic shapes, but we'll work on those some later in the year. So that's kind of it. That's all I wanted to talk about before we get started. So let's go ahead and start practicing some of these shapes and learning about them. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get practicing, learning some shapes, practicing some shapes, and then we'll combine them to make something. Today we're going to need some paper, we're going to need a pencil, something to write with, and we are going to need some crayons or some markers, something to color with, but we won't need that for just a little bit. That'll kind of be our second step today. The first step, kind of like last time with the lines, we're going to do everything on one side of our page, and then when we're done and we move on to our next step, we'll flip it over and use that other side. So before we get started looking at and practicing and learning about specific shapes, let's talk about just a shape in general. Remember, I want you guys to use your pencil. I'm going to use a marker though. It just makes it easier for you guys to see. So if I have a line that starts somewhere on my page, goes wherever it wants to, comes back around and stops exactly where it started, that's a shape. If that line would have gone the same exact direction but stopped right there, that's not a shape. That's just a big curved line. Once it goes back and it kind of closes in on itself and it stops right where it started, that's when it switches from a line and becomes a shape. Any shape works that way. If I did this, that's Not a shape, right? That's just a couple of straight lines that kind of connect, but it's not a shape. But the second I go back to where I started and close that in, then it becomes a shape. So that's how we get shapes. That's what shapes are. It works for shapes like this, which we said were called geometric shapes, the ones that we know about. That's a square. It also works with organic shapes. So the ones that don't really have a name, that just kind of go wherever they want. This might be something we would find in nature. Next time it rains, you might see a puddle. A puddle would be a good example of an organic shape. All right, so on your paper, let's get started. We're gonna learn a couple of our basic shapes. These are shapes that you can use for so many things. That's why these are really good ones to know. So the first shape I want you guys to work with is a triangle. Now, a triangle has 3 lines, 3 straight lines. I'm gonna draw one right there. I'm gonna draw one that goes up towards that direction, and then I'm going to connect them with the 3rd line. So it's called a triangle. It has 3 sides, 1, 2, 3. My straight lines, we're gonna call my sides. And it has 3 angles, 1, 2, 3. Now your corners, those pieces where if this was a mountain and we needed to climb around those pokey parts, those are called angles. That's the big fancy word for those. So I want you guys to go ahead and draw 3 triangles. Now they don't have to look exactly the same. As long as it has 3 sides and 3 corners, 3 angles, it's still a triangle. So even though this one is kind of stretched out, it's still the same shape as that one. They don't look exactly the same, but it's got the same name. Just like that. That's still called a triangle. So it doesn't matter what the size is. It doesn't matter what direction it's pointing. If it's got 3 sides, it's probably a triangle. All right, guys, so the next one we're gonna work on is the shape that probably most of us know, and it has 4 sides. So that one's gonna be a square. Now with a square, the sides want to be the same length. So if this side came all the way down here, but this side was still real short, that wouldn't be a square when I was done with. Each side needs to be like the same size. Now it can be a big square or a little square, but as long as it's got 4 sides and each one is the same size, then it's still a square. All right, guys, go ahead and practice a square and practice by drawing 3 more of them, 3 squares. All right, now you see I'm telling you to practice 3. I've got a bunch more stuff, so I'm just kind of showing you some examples, but I would like you guys to do 3. If you do more, that's fine, but try and do at least 3. All right, so I'm gonna move down on my paper a little bit. The next one is a lot like my square, except 2 of my sides are gonna be longer and 2 of my sides are gonna be shorter. It's kind of like we took our square and we stretched it out. That shape is called a rectangle. So it's got 4 sides, just like a square. It's got 4 corners, 4 angles, just like a square. The difference is 2 of my sides are long and 2 of my sides are short. Now, just like a square, it doesn't matter what size they are, it doesn't matter what direction they're going. As long as it has 4 sides, 2 long ones, 2 short ones, it's probably going to be a rectangle. So go ahead and practice 3 rectangles. All right, my friends, we just have a few more to talk about. Now this next one, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a challenge. It's one of the hardest shapes that people can draw. As a matter of fact, it's so hard that no person, no human on earth can make a perfect one of these shapes by themselves. Now we can make them if we have something to help us with, but for today, since we're practicing, we're just gonna do our best. And that shape is kind of different from the rest of these because these all have straight lines, these all have corners and angles. This one has no corners, no angles, no straight lines. It's one big curved line and it comes back around to meet itself. And that is a circle. So go ahead and do your best to practice 3 circles. Now remember what I said, it's real hard to make them perfect, so we're just trying to do our best. Unless a person has something to help them, like a shape that they can trace around, it's pretty impossible to draw a perfect square. Or, whoops, a perfect circle is what we're talking about. So try your best. All right, so the next shape, my friends, is gonna be kind of like a rectangle, where we said we took a square and stretched it out, except this one is going to be a circle that we stretched out. It's called an oval. Kind of looks like an egg, or maybe even like a football, but it's basically just a circle that you stretched out one way or the other. And it doesn't matter which direction they're going, it doesn't matter how big or how small they are. If it's that circle that looks kind of stretched out, it's an oval. So go ahead and practice that shape, that oval. 3 more of those ovals. All right, so this next one's easy. You guys are gonna do great at this because it's just like our square if we took it and turned it sideways a little bit. It's called a diamond. So instead of my straight lines going side to side and up, down, they're all gonna go at angles. Kind of like that. For the one we're making, it's still gonna have 4 sides, it's still gonna have 4 angles. It also kind of looks like if you took a triangle and made another triangle right underneath it, but you didn't have that line in the middle. So go ahead and try your best to make your 3 diamonds. All right, my friends, last one we're going to learn about. Now, this one is based on something real, but it doesn't look like the real thing. And this is going to be a heart shape. Now, we all know hearts are real. We've got one inside of our body. It's what's keeping us going. But the one that's inside of our body doesn't look exactly like this shape that we're going to learn. Now, this one's kind of tough. So the way we're gonna learn is we're gonna kinda do a couple of separate things. I'm gonna start by making a shape that looks like the bottom of this diamond. Just like that. And then if you remember last time, our bumpy line, which was 2 curved lines right next to each other, I can go 1, 2 bumps on top of that to make a heart shape. Go ahead and practice 3 hearts. Now remember, this one's pretty tough. Just do your best. Big hearts, little hearts, doesn't matter. They're all still hearts. All right, so your shapes might have been bigger than mine, they might have been smaller than mine, but at this point you should have a bunch of shapes all over your paper, and that's awesome. Now later, if you want to, you can go back and color these in. It'll look really great. But we're gonna go ahead and move on to kind of the second step of what we're doing today. We are gonna take all those shapes, or as many of those shapes as you need, and we are going to combine them to draw a house. Now this can be a real house, it can be where you live, or where someone you know lives, or it can be something that's just completely made up out of your own brain. Either one is fine. I'm gonna draw kind of what my house looks like using those shapes. There are some things probably around your house or around the house you're making up or around the house you're thinking of that aren't exactly one of the shapes that we learned. If you've got like a bush or a tree or something, that's not really gonna be one of those shapes. So that's when it's okay to use those organic shapes that don't really have a name. All right, so I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna speed it up real quick because I don't really wanna waste your time having you sit here and watch me draw my house. But just go ahead and watch this. We'll make it go fast. Once we're done, we'll talk about what you need to do and then you'll be able to get started. All right, here we go. All right, so there's a really quick drawing of my house. If you look at it, you'll see it's a lot of the shapes that we learned. It's got squares and rectangles for windows. The whole main shape of the house is a rectangle. We've got a chimney over here where the smoke comes out when there's a fire. That's one big tall rectangle with a bunch of little rectangles to make the bricks. Got some organic shapes down there for some bushes, but that's about it. All right, guys, so now, like we said, I want you to take some of those shapes that we learned, do your best job to either draw your house or somebody else's house that you know, or make up your own house completely. You can add more details if you want to show where it is, what the yard around it looks like, if there's a fence, things like that. Those are the kind of things that you can add as many of as you want. So go ahead, do your best to draw that house. After you are done, don't forget to click that button that says show my artwork to Mr. Holiday and it'll take you to that other Flipgrid site where you can take a picture and show me. After you draw yours, go ahead and color it in. And if you want it to be colored like the real house, that's great. And if you want it to be crazy colors like purple and pink, that's fine too. All right, guys, can't wait to see your houses. Hope you're doing well. See you all later. Bye.